Everyone, and welcome back to our CSEC Quadratics course. Right, last class we would have done the solving a quadratic equation via last two classes actually via factorization. Now there are two other ways to solve a quadratic. I don't have enough information to show you all those stuff as yet because I don't like to do the quadratic formula without showing all the way it come from. So we will get to that in a little bit, right? So right now the only way we know how to solve a quadratic equation is by factorizing, and we'll live with that for now, right? You will get everything else later on. Now today, what we want to deal with is the quadratic curve. Right now, um, when we're looking at the quadratic curve, this is so the curve, the quadratic curve, right? The quadratic curve is the shape of the equation. Is the shape of the shape of the plot of the equation of the equation. So we're looking at the equation y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. So when you plot or sketch this equation, this is the shape that you want to get. Now, we're not dealing with plotting graphs here. That's a fairly straightforward skill, right? And if you need assistance with plotting graphs, you can send me it. So you send me a comment in the comment section, and I will feel free to, and I will actually help you out with it. I will send you a link to a video where you can find that. But right now, we are dealing with a sketch. Right now, before we go into this section, I want to talk about what a sketch is. So a sketch of a curve, right? So a sketch of a curve is not a plot, right? Shows only shows on, only the important points of a graph. Shows only the important points of a graph, and we'll talk about those points for a quadratic graph in a very short while, right? But a sketch does not have to have a scale, right? A sketch does not need a scale, does not need to be drawn to scale. To be drawn to scale. So what that means is that you don't need a graph paper to do a sketch. A sketch is, although this is a rough outline, but it is an outline of of a shape of a curve that shows you just the important points that you need to know. And now with that being said, I want to show you all many different iterations of what a quadratic curve looks like, right? And we're going with each of these here now to see how this works. So these first two here show us generally what a quadratic curve looks like, right? It could look like this, or it could look like this. Now, this is a rough outline. I'm using a little tablet pen here, so I'm not getting the flow of it that you all will get, right? So let me just clear up something for only one time. A lot of people that draw the graph and it looking like this, right? We don't want a bowl, right? This is not how a quadratic curve looks. You notice how this looks almost like a V, but you're rounding it at the bottom or you're rounding it at the top, right? So the name of a quadratic curve, right? The name of a quadratic curve, right? Of the quadratic curve, sorry, of the quadratic curve is the parabola, right? Or depending on how you want to pronounce it, the parabola, right? But parabola is the name of the quadratic curve, right? So both of these are parabolas, right? One is what you call a minimum point, right? So this is what you call a minimum point, right? Minimum point parabola. And this one here, it has a highest point, and then all the other points go under that. This one is what you call the maximum point parabola. Maximum point. Yeah? So you have the minimum point parabola and the maximum point parabola. Now, for you all to draw these sketches, you need to know certain important things off of the graph. Now, first of all, for a sketch, always put in the two variables, y and x, right? So you have them here. Oops. Right? Y and x. And you always put the origin if the origin is there. Right? Now, the next thing that you need to know is one, if it is a minimum point or if it is a maximum point. Now, let me fill in some numbers here for you. Um, right. So what we need to see from this graph, I have some very important points you need to pull from here. First one that you need to see is this point itself. Now, this point here is what you call the vertex of the graph. And remember this word. The vertex is your minimum point or your maximum point. So the vertex in this case here is the x value, right? So you think about what x value. Notice that this point falls in the middle of this and this here. Yeah? Let's say that this number here is 1.5, right? So what we could see here now in this graph is that we have our minimum point is, remember when it's stated the coordinates of a point, you put the number on the x-axis first, so that's minus 1.5, and the number on the y-axis is -10. So this is the coordinates of your vertex, right? Remember, your vertex is your minimum point or your maximum point. So this is a minimum point graph. So that's the first thing that you need to know. The second thing is that the coordinates of the vertex is minus a half, minus 1.5 in this case, and -10. Right? The third thing that you need to look at now is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So that's this value here. Right? So the coordinates, I'm shortening this for chords here, coordinates of the y-intercept, right? The y-intercept, and if you want to know what the y-intercept is, you can write this down. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So when it is on the y-axis, the x value is 0. So the coordinates of the y-intercept is x is 0, y is -8. And the last one now is what we call the roots. Alright, so we want the coordinates of the roots. Coordinates of the roots. Now, the roots are where the graph cuts the x-axis. So let me say that again for those who want to copy it down. The roots are where the graph cuts the x-axis. So that's the horizontal axis. So it cuts the graph at 1, 4. So the roots are 1, 4. But the coordinates of the roots, you need to say the y value. On the x-axis, y is 0. So the coordinates of the roots are -4, 0 and 1, 0. Right? I'll just put 1, 0 underneath here. 1, 0. So these are the 4 of the 5 important things that you need to know for this graph. There's one more thing, but we will talk about that later on. Right now, these are the most important things here. Right? So this is how we find the corners of the vertex. Actually, I could probably fit that in now. Now, if we look at this graph, right, this graph is supposed to be symmetrical. It means that you could draw one line of symmetry. So let's draw that line of symmetry here. Right? So this line of symmetry passes through the point here. Now, passes through the minimum point. So something important about this here is the equation of this line of symmetry. So this is what we call the axis. Axis just means essentially line, right? Axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry, you notice this line passes through the x-axis at -1.5. So the axis of symmetry, the equation of it is x is equal to -1.5, and that's it. Right? That's all you have to do there. So we have to be able to identify these things. This here, what type of graph it is what you call the nature of the vertex. Right? So the nature of the vertex tells you whether it's a maximum point or a minimum point graph. Right? So let's look at this one here now. Right? So we'll be going through all these graphs here. It might take us a couple of videos, but that's okay. Right? So let's look at this one now. So I'm putting some numbers here for all it. Let's go with 6. So it'll be around 8. So this is -6. All right, let's say this is 9. This is 10. All right, so this will be around 2. Right? 1. Right, 3, 1. All right, so let's look at this graph here now. right? How do we determine all of these things here now? So the first thing is what type of graph this is. So this here, the nature is that it is a maximum point graph, right? The second one now is what are the coordinates of the vertex? The coordinates of the vertex, right? So the vertex is the maximum point. That's this highest point here, right? The x value first is 1 and the y value second is 10. So the coordinates of the vertex is 1, 10. Number 3, we want the coordinates of the y-intercept. Coordinates of the y-intercept, right? I'll just call it y-int for now. Is where the graph passes through the y-axis. So that's here, right? So on the y-axis, the number is 9, but on the x-axis, if you just pull down to here, you'll see the number is 0. Always remember that on the y-axis, x is 0. Number 4, we want the coordinates of the roots. Good. So if we want the coordinates of the roots, we want where the graph passes through the x-axis. So you notice the roots in this case are minus 6 and 8. Those are the roots, but the coordinates of the roots are negative 6, 0. X is negative 6, y is 0, and 8, 0. That's the coordinates of the roots. And the last one now is number 5. What is the axis of symmetry? Axis of symmetry. Right, so how do we find the axis of symmetry? You draw your line, a dotted line that is, through the maximum or minimum point, through the vertex, right? And whatever x value it passes through, that is the value for the axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry, the equation of the axis of symmetry is x is equal to 1, right? So that's the equation of the axis of symmetry. So these are the things that you need to know for these graphs. So I will do another video because I won't have enough time in this one. Right? If you notice by now, the program that I'm using gives me 15 minutes at most, and I'm good at that, giving you a little bite-sized points on this here. So this is your first video on the sketching of a curve. So you need to know how to identify all of these things here. But I promise you that it really isn't too bad, right? You all will get it out. It'll just take some practice. So in the next session, we will be doing all these other graphs underneath here to figure out what is the minimum point or what are all of these things with respect to each one of those graphs. Yeah. So until the next video, stay safe and take care, everybody.